You're listening to COB, Conversations on the Business of Brands, with Sudeep Chawla and Sharan Raghavan.
So, Sudeep, we're in the last quarter of the year and people are going in for their performance reviews. So, they're going to get feedback, especially the marketers, performance-based and behavior-based feedback. So, let's preempt that conversation for the marketers who are listening into this podcast. Let's tell them what they need to have, what qualities they need to portray to be better marketers. And more importantly, how they can get better at this. So this becomes like a cheat sheet before they go in for the annual reviews.
I think the annual reviews would possibly be a little bit of a more elaborate affair, because they'll get feedback on behaviors that they've already demonstrated, and they will also get feedback on fitment against company values also. But yes, let's take that up. Although none of us claims to be an absolute expert marketer, but yes, basis our combined experience of a few decades, we can possibly put a list together that we have observed from some of the good marketers that we have seen from close quarters.
So where are we kicking things off first?
Okay, so I think the very first one is the flair for storytelling. A person's ability, and more than the ability, the interest to try and encapsulate a topic into a story of sorts, which will evince interest from the audience at the receiving end.
Basically, to keep the audience hooked into the narrative.
Yes. And usually I've found that it is not just about telling it in the most entertaining manner. Usually it involves first breaking it down in your own head, then simplifying it in your own head first, and then replaying it for the audience. And both of us would have heard this from a lot of people when they say that, why don't you explain to me like I am an 8-year-old? What they really want to know is whether you've thought it through, whether you've broken it down, and then whether you have the clarity and the flair to tell it in a super interesting manner which will pique their interest. The dimension that I wanted to add was that a marketer usually talks to audiences of different kinds. And this is something that I mentioned earlier in one of the previous podcasts, that you will end up talking to the top management, the CXOs of the company. You will end up talking to your reporting managers. You will end up talking to your peers. You will end up talking to cross-functional team members who are finally going to execute some of the tasks that you kick off. And you will end up talking to people in sales, executives, your field employees, who are finally going to take your product to its intended audience. And when you're talking to each one of them, you will need to have the ability, the maturity to temper your pitch, to choose what part of the pitch would work for these guys. As you go higher, people want to be engaged with principles. And as you go down, people want to be engaged with evidence. Principles versus evidence / execution, that is the entire spectrum. So principles is why you are doing something and what would happen once you are able to fully execute it, and what are the key indicators that you are in the right direction or you have reached the state that you wanted to reach. So those are principles. Other end of the spectrum is execution. What will you do to make progress in the intended direction? It is all your executions. It is what point of sale material are you making, what advertising are you making, what digital campaign are you going to run. So it is all about elements. Therefore, this is an entire spectrum which goes from why to possibly how and what. And different audiences lie on different ends of this spectrum. And the marketer therefore has to clearly know what kind of audience needs to be engaged with what part of the message for the same mission. So that's the distinction I wanted to draw.
And how does one get better at this?
So I think it's an old adage that practice makes a man perfect, man / woman perfect. Now, That is true for this one as well. I can possibly give a suggestion on how to practice this. So there are two parts to this. First part is in your head, or if you want to write, do write it down. Draw some concentric circles, inwards to outwards. Then write names of people, starting from the ones that you're most comfortable with, and go outwards towards people that you're least comfortable with. You might want to write the names of your family members or your best friends in the inner circle, and then you go out and you say some of the acquaintances who possibly you bump into every day in your office. Then some other acquaintance in the outside circle, possibly some acquaintances whom you possibly bump into once a month, etc., in your society. Yeah. Then somebody else, like that. So in decreasing order of comfort, just write those names down. Now this becomes your circle of practice. So the principle is that you start from the innermost circle, you work on your delivery, and then you keep going outwards to check what is the kind of comfort you have developed in your delivery. So the inner circle gives you comfort on your delivery, and therefore that is where you develop confidence. And then you test out the confidence by going outside. What would you test out on? And one of the commonest things that I've seen and done is to try and read newspaper every day. Find a news that really interests you, research it, think about it, break it down in your head, and that becomes your mission, that you have to deliver this to other people and in a manner that will interest them.
I think that's awesome because I wasn't quite expecting you to have a framework to get better at storytelling. I thought it's more a natural flair. And I think this is a very, very simple exercise. And this also goes back to the point where a lot of people, when they present in meetings, right, you see people who put up their slides and read off it. And there are people who put up the slides and then give you a story behind each of the slide that they've made.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, the next one I have a problem with. You keep saying measure what you treasure all the time. And I see that the next point on the list is about being comfortable with ambiguity.
Correct.
Aren't you contradicting yourself here?
Okay, let me explain myself. So when I say comfort with ambiguity, my invitation to all the marketers and budding marketers is that you are bound to get into situations or areas where you will not have perfect data. In fact, if you are really being brave, you are bound to get into situations where you don't have any data, areas which are completely unknown to you, etc. Now, honestly, if you have never been in such situations, I think you are not being brave enough, or you're not challenging the boundaries of yourself as a marketer and your brand. When you step into uncharted territories, you immediately might feel uncomfortable. It is natural for everybody to feel comfortable with numbers, because when they are numbers, then you get some kind of certainty around it. When I ask you to become comfortable with ambiguity, what I mean is that you should be comfortable generating numbers in ambiguity. What I mean is that once you get into an uncharted territory, if you're a good marketer, you will find sufficient surrogates, to arrive at certain data points which will help you navigate that situation or navigate that area. You use those data points to first create sufficient conviction in your heart. Then what you do is you use those data points as well as your own conviction to convince people around you. Every time you do this along with a story, which is where your flair for storytelling comes into play. And every time you see a positive reception at the other end, it keeps strengthening your own conviction.
But isn't that a bit of a gray area where you're convincing yourself in something you're not very sure about?
So you are not sure about when you entered there, but then you generated some data around it. You thought about it a bit more. You use some surrogates, and then you found some way to possibly give you an estimated measure of where you are going.
Got it. So keep getting sure as you progress with it.
Correct.
Got it.
Be comfortable about stepping into ambiguity, because if you're smart enough, you will find surrogates to get data. That data will never be perfect because it is coming from surrogates, but it will give you a very good guidance. And then when you are activating your plans, that is where you start measuring that whether you are moving in the right direction or not. So that is where measure whatever you treasure comes from.
Got it.
So this particular point, Sharon, specifically is around it supports my other point where I say that people in sales sell products and services, and marketers are supposed to be the best salesperson in the room because what they sell is their conviction.
Oh, true. Very true. Yes.
And conviction selling is any day different and difficult, more difficult than selling a product or a service. You are actually generating belief.
Yeah, it's abstract, right? Yeah.
It's abstract. Yeah. So when Martin Luther King said, I have a dream, what he was doing, he was selling conviction. He did not say, I have a plan or I have a product. So therefore, you sell the why, and then people get around it and possibly, buy whatever else you are selling along with it.
Absolutely.
So therefore, the chain of conviction goes from convincing yourself, convincing people around you, convincing your reporting authority, etc., then convincing the entire management, and then finally via your marketing tools or marketing campaigns, convincing the world. What you're essentially doing, you're transferring your conviction from deep within your heart to the world at large. But it all started from you stepping into uncharted territory where you did not have any data to start with.
Right. So it sounds a lot like a confidence game.
Yes.
But how does one improve this aspect of this trait as a marketer?
So I found this very fascinating from the very start when I used to read these interviews that consulting companies subject people to. They will subject you to some random situations and you are supposed to generate some surrogate data to arrive at an answer. So, for example, one of their questions that I remember was, how many tennis balls can fit into an airplane? Now, they don't expect you to know everything around it, but they expect you to make educated guesses. Yeah, so you will say, okay, in an airplane, there are possibly 24 rows. Yeah, each row has, in a domestic airplane, has 6 seats, so 144 seats. Yeah, so each seat has about this much area. So, about when you sit, it has about 3 feet of area in front of you. Yeah, between each seat. So therefore, when you are placing 24 rows, it is about 72 feet of distance. So that's the length of that seating area. Yeah. Then you add some bit of length ahead for the area where the service begins and the captain and the crew. So maybe another about 15 feet ahead, and then about 15 16 feet behind. Yeah. And if you think of it as a cylinder, so that gives you the height of the cylinder. So 16 15 plus 15 30 plus 72, about 102 feet of height. Yeah. Now volume of a cylinder is pi r square h. So pi, which is 3.14, you just need the radius. H is 102 feet. Now height is when you stand up in a plane. Yeah, you will possibly observe that the height is about 6.5 feet to 7 feet of a plane. So that gives you the radius. So therefore you can calculate the volume of a plane thinking of it as a cylinder. Yeah. Then you calculate the volume of a ball. Yeah. So pi r cube is the volume of a ball. Yeah. So therefore you then assume some radius for the tennis ball. Now you know volume of the ball, you know volume of the plane. Now this is where some bit of concept might come in, where you might say that if you divide the two, you can get how many balls can fit in, but you can't divide exactly both of them, because once the balls start fitting, there will be some empty spaces in between them. So if you've read chemistry, you will know that there is something called hexagonal close packing, HCP. It has a packing factor of about 85%. Yeah, so you divide it and multiply it by 85%, that will tell you how many balls can fit into an airplane. Now my answer could actually be 50% wrong, but to a consultant company it doesn't matter. Why? because I've used educated guess to come up with something, and more often than not, the person sitting in front of me will not be able to better me in this logic. So I am convincing myself, there is conviction transference. Yeah. And then I keep convincing people.
So this is possibly the first time I've heard why engineers get into marketing. And one, I don't like it, but I see the conviction being transferred.
Yes. And you don't need to be an engineer for all of this. I'm just saying that there are various ways of working out answers to a problem.
Right. It's about the logic, being very clear about the logic you're after, and therefore finding answers based on that logic.
And using variety of surrogates here and there. So therefore, my advice, if you want to really practice it, is to possibly start with some of these questions. You will find them very easily online. Consulting interview questions. Yeah, these are the kind of questions that BCG, Bain, McKinsey, etc. ask in their interviews. What you can also do then later on, when you come across situations, uncertain situations like this, try to think, how will you estimate something?
You're listening to COB, Conversations on the Business of Brands. Your hosts are Sudeep Chawla, marketing practitioner, business leader, and educator to advertising and marketing professionals, and Sharan Raghavan of Vitral Brand Expertise, growth consultants to consumer-facing brands and businesses. For more information, go to cobcast.net. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling your friends and rating us.
So after comfort with ambiguity, the next one is consumer centricity.
Right. But isn't that a bit of a banal point? Because isn't all marketing about consumer centricity?
It actually is, but I'm keeping it here to drive upon a very, very important point. Too often I've seen that when you join a brand new, when you take up a brand, one of the first things that you do is you go to the consumer, understand the brand, understand how your brand consumer behaves or is likely to behave. So you do that. But after spending some bit of time on the brand, I've seen too often a lot of the brand managers become so comfortable that they start believing that they know the brand better than their consumers. And secondly, they also start thinking in a lot of the case that they are the consumers. And that starts becoming dangerous, because then you live in an echo chamber. Then you start predicting, then you start speaking for the consumer, etc. And that is what one has to guard against always.
And I think that's actually a marketer's hubris, where they lose the humility
Yeah.
to think they know who the consumer is, and
Yeah.
to stay grounded and be connected to what the consumer is doing, saying, thinking. I think that's pretty central. How can one get better at being more consumer centric?
I am sure you would remember this. When we were in marketing in Cadbury, one of the invitation our marketing director, Mr. Sanjay Purohit, used to give to us was that every month he wanted us to do a few consumer immersions and come back and record it in a format which says, what did I learn new from the consumer and what did I know that got validated by the consumer? He always used to force you to think about things that you observed new. And therefore, he continuously made sure that we were always learning from the consumer.
That's so true. I think that is the simplest way of doing it. And it's helped me in great stead, because
Yeah.
when you go across different markets, different categories, this culture of visiting the consumers, just understanding their lives, spending time with consumers is actually the gold for most marketers. That's the
Yes.
only way you discover insights.
Correct. So therefore, just force yourself to fill up this box. What did I learn new from the consumer? And you will continue to learn from them.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
so the next one is also going back to a previous episode of scaring a marketer. Doesn't curiosity kill the cat? And why will it spare a marketer?
Okay. So the next one actually is the marketer should be super curious. Now, Sharan has a genuine question. Why wouldn't curiosity kill the marketer? I would say lack of curiosity certainly will. Too often, marketers will work with a lot of the people who are supposed to either help formulate or help execute the plans that marketers would put together. A lot of these guys are functional experts in their domain, and hence the marketer will not be the ultimate authority on that subject. But the marketer is the owner of the initiative, and therefore he would need to decide on most of those subjects. The marketer needs to be super curious because at the first instance, you will get to hear a lot of technical terms from the functional expert. The marketer would need to ask a lot of hows and whys to really peel the onion and get to the core of why what is being said. That is where you discover the core reason, and core reasons are usually very easy to understand.
The fundamentals, right?
Yes,
And I think this is what Naval Ravikant, the person you also quote often, he speaks about saying, learn the fundamentals of any subject and you will never be in doubt. And
correct,
you'll be able to understand even the most complex aspects of the subjects.
correct, exactly. The word that I use for this is intellectual humility. This is something which is used very widely at my current organization, where the belief very clearly is no matter how expert you are, there is always more to know than what you know.
Brilliant. I think that's a brilliant way of putting it.
So I think this is something which is going to help you in your storytelling also. The whole practice of understanding something and asking a lot of why question to discover the root of it. When you're doing this in isolation, read any complex subject, anything, in a newspaper or a book, and then think of Google as your partner. Write all the why questions that come to your head and keep peeling the onion. Usually it is said that after you've asked 5 whys is when you face truth and nothing but the truth. The other way is to do it with in conjunction with somebody where, whenever you hear something, show genuine interest and then ask a lot of why questions. You will start understanding, you will get to the basics very soon.
That's an easy sounding exercise, but I'm sure the why questions will not be so easy.
They won't be, you will need to practice them, but
Right.
this is something that you could do in very simple, very easy situations.
Right. Awesome. And the next point makes me very happy now because after all the talk of humility as a marketer, you finally acknowledge that marketers are the kings.
Yes. So the fifth quality that I wanted to speak about is being a king without the crown. Whether we like it or not, marketers are going to lead a lot of projects. Most of those projects hopefully will lead the organizations into new uncharted territories and hopefully help them break new barriers. When the organization wants to get there, organization would need to formulate and execute. All of this is done via people who are, as I said, functional experts in their area. Your packaging experts, R&D experts, market insights experts, sales experts, production experts, manufacturing experts, logistics experts, sourcing experts, procurement experts, etc. And most of them don't report to you. They don't even have the same KRAs. So therefore you might think of yourself as a king because you're leading the project, but you don't have any crown on your head.
Yeah, and your stakeholders could even be senior to you within the organization.
More often than not, they are more senior to you, yeah, by experience and a lot of the times by rank also. What will determine your success is your ability to get work done from them, especially when they are not reporting to you.
That's amazing. So how does one do it though?
This is where all the other four come to your rescue. First, you use your flair for storytelling to make sure that everybody understands why we are doing this, why is it important for the company, etc. Then you transfer conviction via some amount of data, etc., that you've gone with. Yeah. You also make sure that they are fully convinced that this is a opportunity worth investing into and the consumer really needs this. So therefore you have to demonstrate sufficient consumer centricity and consumer understanding. Yeah. You also have to show genuine interest in what they have to say about the opportunity, such that you are able to understand the core basic and include their point of view in framing your final offering or the proposition. Last but not the least, you would have to use a little bit of a psychology principle and recognize the fact that every professional in the company is looking for some amount of sunshine, for an opportunity to shine. If you look like somebody whose project would help them get some shine on themselves, they would want to contribute, regardless of whether it is a part of their KRA or not.
But not all projects or not all systems will have the ability to get the company's leadership attention, right?
Yeah, they won't. This is where the marketeer's ability comes to the fore. A good marketeer will be able to convince everybody that my project is the most important project that this organization has ever done.
Yeah, at least starts with the conviction, I'd say.
Yes, and it has to be pursued with that kind of urgency, that kind of conviction, for it to really translate into some kind of reality. A lot of the projects will not possibly see the light of the day, but that is what the nature of marketing is. But if you start with some kind of doubt in your head, then only God can help you. And let me just preempt what you're about to ask, Sharan. You will certainly ask, how does one get better at it?
Yes.
So, what I've found, Sharan, is that all of this happens only when you have taken the first effort of establishing a connect with the person on the other side. When that person stops being just a purchase manager and becomes Mr. X, Mr. Ashish, Mr. Vishesh, Mr. Vishwesh, etc. for you. So you have to recognize that professional is a human being for them to be able to empathize with you, work with you, and contribute to your cause. So my advice to all marketeers is to, at least at the start of your stint, write less, meet more.
I've seen enough world wars started over email in corporate cultures. Yes.
Correct. So don't write emails listed to 16 people, out of which 8 are in CC, and those are the bosses, and you're trying to get their subordinates to work, because that's not going to work in the long run. If you want your work to get done, go meet those 8 subordinates. They also want to be treated with equivalent amount of respect, if not more. Make them feel like you value them, because you genuinely should value them, because your job gets done via them. That is the first barrier you have to cross. So if you want to get better at all of this, from this point, specifically in this point, I would urge all of you to make personal connect with all your cross-functional team members. Go meet them, get to know them on their first name basis, and that is how you will succeed.
Right. That's very true, because I think for all that we talk about marketers, marketing is one function that really doesn't get too much accomplished by themselves. It's always dependent either on an internal stakeholder or an external stakeholder. And I think this point makes a lot of sense to say how you need personal equations to get anything done within the marketing system, for the marketing system, rather. That's awesome, Sudeep. These are 5 ways how a marketer can get better or become a better marketer. And I think it all makes a lot of sense, right? It's about the flair of storytelling. And a lot of marketing is about storytelling anyway. Being comfortable with ambiguity. And I love the point of how you said how you can build confidence by accepting ambiguity to start with. And the role of having to stay grounded and humble enough to acknowledge the consumer at all times, and the need to stay curious, and capping it all off to be the king without the crown. I love that line. I think all of this makes not just for a better marketer, but actually a better person, because it does talk about communication, conviction, humility, and teamwork. Communication, again, I'm sure it helps a lot of marketers, and it also ends up making better people.
I didn't think of it that way.
No, but I think it's very, very useful, especially your tips on how you can improve on these 5 aspects. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Sharan.
Thank you for listening to COB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharavana Raghavan. Subscribe and learn more at cobcast.net. That's COBBCAST.net.